41 years ago, a small underdog movie about a bullied teenager and a soft-spoken handyman turned into one of the defining films of a generation. The Karate Kid wasn't supposed to be a phenomenon. It was a modest coming-of-age story shot on a limited budget, built around a cast of mostly unknown actors. Nobody involved expected it to still be talked about 4 decades later, let alone to spawn sequels, a reboot franchise, and one of the most beloved streaming revivals in television history, with Cobra Kai. But it did, and along the way it turned a group of ordinary young performers into faces that an entire generation would never forget. What happened to them after the cameras stopped rolling is a story most fans have never fully heard. Some of them became more famous than the movie itself. Some walked away from Hollywood entirely and never came back. Some found redemption decades later in a way nobody could have predicted. And some didn't live long enough to see how loved their characters would eventually become. This is the story of the cast of The Karate Kid, then and now, and by the end of it, a few of these turns might genuinely surprise you. When Ralph Macchio was cast as Daniel LaRusso, he was already 22 years old and playing a character several years younger, a New Jersey teenager relocated to a new town in California, learning to defend himself from an old man in a backyard. Nobody in that theater realized they were watching a performer nearly old enough to be in law school. Macchio carried almost every scene of the film, and Hollywood responded exactly the way you'd expect. Offers poured in. Studios wanted him for franchises, magazine covers wanted his face, and by every normal measure of the industry, he was positioned to become one of the biggest movie stars of his generation. He didn't take that path. Macchio turned down a significant amount of what was offered to him, choosing instead to step back from the relentless machine of stardom. And he married Phyllis Fierro, his longtime partner, and the two built a private life together away from the spotlight, raising 2 children largely outside the glare of the industry that had made him famous. For much of the Macchio remained a familiar face from memory rather than a constant presence on screen, choosing family stability over the chase for the next big role. Then, at 56 years old, everything changed again. A small YouTube series called Cobra Kai brought Daniel LaRusso back, older, successful, and still wrestling with the same insecurities that had shaped him as a teenager. The show became a global phenomenon, eventually moving to Netflix and running for 6 seasons before wrapping up. Macchio, once again, became one of the most recognizable faces on television, this time as a grown man reflecting on the choices that shaped him. Today, Ralph Macchio is 64 years old and still married to Phyllis after nearly 40 years together, arguably the most stable and quietly successful story to come out of this entire cast. Elisabeth Shue played Ollie Mills, the girl who catches Daniel's eye early in the film, and for an entire generation of moviegoers, she became one of the defining faces of teen cinema. The years right after The Karate Kid were a whirlwind for her. She appeared in Adventures in Babysitting, played opposite Tom Cruise in Cocktail, returned to the franchise for The Karate Kid Part 3, and became a fixture of the Back to the Future sequels as Jennifer, a role she took over for the second and third films. What came next surprised almost everyone who had watched her as the girl next door. In the middle of her acting career, Shue enrolled at Harvard University and completed a political science degree, finishing her studies while balancing her growing family. It wasn't a publicity move. She simply wanted the education, and she pursued it seriously while continuing to work in film. She delivered the performance that redefined how the industry saw her entirely. In Leaving Las Vegas, she played an escort who falls in love with a man drinking himself to death, played by Nicolas Cage. The role earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, and overnight, the actress, once known primarily for teen romance, became one of the most respected dramatic performers of her generation. She married director Davis Guggenheim, and the two are still together today, raising 3 children while both continued building substantial careers. Shue kept working steadily for decades, appearing in CSI, The Boys, and eventually returning to the Karate Kid universe in Cobra Kai, once again playing Ollie. Elisabeth Shue is 62 years old today, one of the few members of this cast whose career only grew more respected with time. Few characters from cinema were as thoroughly hated as Johnny Lawrence. William Zabka played the blonde-haired, black-belted bully who tormented Daniel throughout the film, right down to the final crane kick that ended their rivalry. Audiences despised him with real intensity, and Zabka became so convincing in the role that Hollywood struggled to imagine him as anything else. He was cast in similar bully archetypes in films like Just One of the Guys and Back to School, and by his mid-20s, he found himself typecast in a persona he had only originated once, nearly a decade earlier. Through the late, the phone calls slowed considerably. Zabka kept working where he could, taking smaller roles, moving into producing, and quietly writing scripts on the side. One of those side projects turned out to be more significant than almost anyone realized. He co-wrote a short film called Most, which received an Academy Award nomination, making Zabka a legitimately Oscar-nominated screenwriter, a fact that even many devoted fans of the Karate Kid franchise never learned. The turning point of his career arrived with the premiere of Cobra Kai. Zabka returned as an older, more damaged version of Johnny Lawrence, divorced, drinking too much, working a dead-end job, and trying to rebuild the same dojo that had once turned him into someone he wasn't proud of. Watching that broken, working-class man attempt to become better resonated deeply with audiences, and something remarkable happened. The entire country reconsidered him. The villain of the became one of the most sympathetic and beloved characters of the streaming era. William Zabka is 60 years old today, and after 4 decades of being remembered as the guy everyone loved to hate, he has spent the better part of the last decade finally being the guy everyone roots for. Chad McQueen played Dutch, one of the more menacing members of the Cobra Kai crew, standing behind Johnny Lawrence throughout the film. Watching him in the tournament scenes, there's a hard edge to his performance that fans often chalk up to good casting. What most viewers never fully connected is who his father actually was. Chad McQueen was the only son of Steve McQueen, the legendary actor known as the King of Cool, star of films like Bullet and The Great Escape. Steve McQueen died of cancer when Chad was just 20 years old. For years later, Chad appeared in The Karate Kid, carrying a surname that meant something enormous in Hollywood, whether he wanted the attention or not. He continued acting for a stretch, appearing in both The Karate Kid and The Karate Kid Part 2, along with a handful of other film roles. But acting was never where his heart truly was. Like his father, Chad McQueen was drawn to motorsport, and he eventually stepped away from acting almost entirely to pursue racing seriously. He founded McQueen Racing and competed at a genuinely high level, including events like of Le Mans, honoring the same passion that had defined his father's life outside of film. McQueen suffered a serious injury after a fall, one that friends and family later said he never fully recovered from. Over the following years, his health steadily declined. Chad McQueen died at his ranch in Palm Desert, California, from organ failure connected to that injury. He was 63 years old, survived by his wife Jeannie and his children Chase and Madison, who continue to run McQueen Racing in his honor. He never appeared in Cobra Kai, despite the producers reportedly wanting to bring him back. 2 McQueens, father and son, both gone before their time, both remembered for a fearless love of speed. Few characters raised the temperature of a scene the way John Kreese did. Martin Kove played the ruthless Cobra Kai sensei, the Vietnam veteran who taught his students that mercy was for the weak, and every moment he appeared on screen carried a genuine sense of menace. Off camera, however, Kove built a reputation as one of the most approachable and beloved actors on the convention circuit, the kind of performer who happily signs autographs for the same fans who grew up terrified of him. Kove worked steadily for decades after The Karate Kid, with a notable run on Cagney and Lacey, along with dozens of action films and television guest appearances throughout the following years. His career, like so many others in this cast, found new life when Cobra Kai brought John Kreese back, older, meaner, and more dangerous than ever. The role reintroduced Kove to an entirely new generation of fans and gave his career a genuine second act. At 77 years old, he even competed on Dancing with the Stars. Today, Martin Kove is 79 years old and shows up regularly at fan conventions around the world, widely regarded as one of the most gracious and fan-friendly members of the entire cast, still clearly enjoying every bit of the attention his most famous villain continues to bring him. Rob Garrison played Tommy, the Cobra Kai member known for his gleefully cruel enthusiasm during the film's climactic tournament, delivering one of the movie's most quoted lines as he cheered on his friends against Daniel. It's a small but memorable role, one that fans of the film have never forgotten, largely because of what happened decades later. Garrison worked steadily through the years following The Karate Kid, appearing in supporting roles across television shows, including MacGyver, Coach, and Columbo, along with a part in The Karate Kid Part 2. He had mostly stepped back from acting, staying closer to home in Wheeling, West Virginia, occasionally appearing in local theater. Cobra Kai brought him back for its second season, giving Tommy a storyline in which the character was dying of cancer, reunited one last time with his old friends for a farewell trip. It was written and filmed as fans would later come to understand it, as a tribute to a real illness Garrison himself was quietly battling. He had been dealing with serious kidney and liver problems, and shortly after that episode aired, he was hospitalized. Rob Garrison died in a hospital in West Virginia after his organs failed following more than a month of treatment. He was 59 years old. His Cobra Kai castmates spoke publicly about how much his loss affected them, grateful that at least he had gotten a chance to say goodbye to Tommy on screen before he passed. Randy Heller played Lucille LaRusso, Daniel's hard-working single mother who uproots her son's life in search of something better. It's a warm, grounded performance, the kind that feels instantly familiar to anyone who grew up around a similarly tired but devoted parent. What most audiences never realized is just how often they had seen Heller's face in the decades that followed, usually without ever connecting the name. Heller became one of the most reliably working character actors in American television. She appeared as Miss Blankenship, Don Draper's blunt elderly secretary on Mad Men, a role whose sudden and darkly comic exit became one of the show's most talked about moments. She turned up on The Sopranos, ER, and Desperate Housewives, quietly building one of the steadiest character actor careers of her generation. She returned to the Karate Kid universe as Lucille in Cobra Kai, once again playing a mother still deeply protective of her son decades later. Randy Heller is 79 years old today and remains one of the few members of this cast whose career simply kept building, steadily and consistently, long after the movie that introduced her to audiences. Tony O'Dell played Jimmy, one of the Cobra Kai boys standing alongside Johnny and the rest of the crew that tormented Daniel throughout the film. It's a smaller role, easy to overlook, and that's part of what makes his story interesting. 4 or 5 straight years after The Karate Kid, O'Dell was a series regular on Head of the Class, one of ABC's most popular sitcoms of the late 1980s, playing Alan Pinkard, an uptight honor student who became a recognizable face to nearly every household with a television. Millions of viewers watched him every single week, without ever connecting him back to the blonde Cobra Kai Kid from the movie theater a few years earlier. After Head of the Class ended, O'Dell gradually stepped back from acting, moving into voiceover work and other projects behind the scenes rather than chasing another long-running series. He returned briefly to the Karate Kid universe as Jimmy in the second season of Cobra Kai, reuniting with the surviving members of the original Cobra Kai gang. Tony O'Dell is 66 years old today, and he still shows up occasionally at nostalgia conventions, happy to sign autographs for fans who remember him from either side of his career. Larry B. Scott played Jerry, another member of the Cobra Kai dojo, and if his face looks familiar from somewhere entirely different, there's a good reason. That same year, Scott also appeared in Revenge of the Nerds as Lamar Luttrell, the flamboyant, scene-stealing member of the Trilams. 2 of the most beloved teen comedies of the decade, released within months of each other, both featuring the same actor in very different roles, and very few fans of either film have ever put the 2 performances together. Scott worked steadily through appearing in films like Iron Eagle and taking on a range of television roles. His on-screen career slowed after that stretch, though he never stepped away from performing entirely, continuing to take on voice work and smaller projects over the years, including voicing characters in the Diablo video game franchise. Larry B. Scott is 64 years old today, still occasionally acting, and still a familiar and welcome face on the nostalgia convention circuit, representing an era when character actors like him could build lasting, sustainable careers without ever needing to be the biggest name on the poster. Not every story in this cast has a tidy update, and Israel Werbies is the clearest example of that. He played Freddy Fernandez, Daniel's very first friend after arriving in Reseda, the kid who introduces him around at the beach party early in the film before their friendship quietly falls apart under peer pressure. It's a small but meaningful role in the story, and by the end of the film, Freddy is the one clapping for Daniel's victory despite everything that came before. After The Karate Kid, Werby's on-screen career essentially came to a stop. He took on a handful of minor television appearances in the years that followed, and then, largely, disappeared from public life. He has never done the convention circuit that so many of his castmates regularly attend, and he has never sat for a retrospective interview about the film. Fans who love The Karate Kid still ask about him from time to time online, and there simply isn't a definitive answer. Based on the timeline of the film, Werby would be in his early 60s today. Wherever he is, by every indication, that appears to be exactly where he wants to be. William Bassett played Mr. Mills, Ali's disapproving country club father, a small role built almost entirely around a handful of scenes and a carefully calibrated coldness toward the kid from Reseda. What most viewers of The Karate Kid never realized is that by the time the film came out, Bassett had already been a working actor in Hollywood for nearly 2 decades, appearing in shows like Bonanza, The Love Boat, and Quincy, M.E., along with films such as The Towering Inferno. Bassett kept working for decades after The Karate Kid, building one of the more understated but genuinely remarkable resumes in the industry, with more than 100 film and television credits spanning from Feel the Way Through Thee and beyond, including a memorable turn as a sheriff in Rob Zombie's House of Corpses and voice work in major video games. He was the kind of performer whose face audiences recognized instantly, even when they couldn't quite place from where. William Bassett died at his home in Los Angeles at the age of 89, closing out one of the longest and steadiest careers of anyone connected to this film. Patty Johnson appeared in The Karate Kid for only a few minutes, playing the referee at the All-Valley Karate Tournament, the man who calls the points and eventually holds Daniel's arm up after the crane kick lands. But his fingerprints are on every single fight in the movie, because Johnson wasn't primarily an actor at all. He was one of the most accomplished American martial artists of his era, a 9th-degree black belt in American Tang Soo Do, who trained alongside Chuck Norris and served as a driving force behind the National Tang Soo Do Congress. By the time The Karate Kid was cast, Johnson had already become one of the most in-demand fight choreographers in Hollywood, having worked on films like Enter the Dragon. He went on to choreograph every fight across the original Karate Kid trilogy, personally training both Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio, and later worked on films including the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles trilogy, Mortal Kombat, and Batman and Robin. The crane kick that ends the film, the move fans have imitated in backyards for 40 years, exists in its final form largely because of Johnson's work with Macchio. He never appeared in Cobra Kai, but his influence on the franchise's DNA remained permanent. Patty Johnson died at his home in Los Angeles of natural causes. He was 84 years old, surrounded by the memory of a career that shaped the way movie fights have looked for half a century. No cast member's journey carries more weight than Pat Morita's. As Mr. Miyagi, the Okinawan handyman who fixes cars, catches flies with chopsticks, and quietly teaches a fatherless teenager how to defend himself without ever raising his voice, Morita became one of the most beloved father figures in American film history. For millions of kids who grew up, Miyagi was the wisest adult on their screen,